Ya Ali Medad, and welcome everyone to our national webinar series, Aspire. This series aims to explore topics relating faith and world in the current times we find ourselves in, and to provide avenues for thoughtful reflection and inspiration. Today, we're very excited to have Dr. Bashir Jiwani join us today. Dr. Bashir Jiwani is an ethicist by profession and leads the departments of Ethics Services and Diversity Services at Fraser Health, one of Canada's largest and fastest growing health authorities. Dr. Jiwani is keenly interested in serving the various interrelated communities he belongs to and that we're all members of to live better, more peaceful, and just lives. He believes this can happen through careful attention to the choices we make, from how we choose to be with ourselves and each other. Without further delay, let us hear from Dr. Jiwani.
Nayab, everybody. Thank you very much for having me to ITREB USA for hosting the series. This is a wonderful series, I think, and I'm quite honored to be able to participate. I'm going to basically talk about a number of ideas for about 55 minutes or so, and then I understand that we'll be having some question and answer after that. And so let's just dive into it then, if that's okay. We just finished we just completed an election here in British Columbia, the province where I live, near Vancouver, where I am. And of course, we have a very important and significant election happening in the United States coming up next week. And so while all this election talk is in the air, there was a sense that it might be good to explore what does it mean to be a citizen? And so that's really what we're hoping to do today. And I'm again grateful for the opportunity to get to reflect a little bit on this out loud with you. And basically, I'm going to share 4 ideas over the course of the time that we have this evening. I'm going to suggest that citizenship involves accepting certain rights and responsibilities, to help shape our world. And this is an everyday activity. I'm going to suggest that we're always working out the details of democracy and citizenship, and that's a work in progress, as it were. I'm going to say citizenship matters, and that it's really important that we should be good citizens. And that means living up to certain ideals, certain character traits. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Shia Ismaili Muslim tradition, and I'm going to suggest that you can actually interpret the tradition as a call to citizenship. Now, why am I interested in these matters? I'm interested in these matters in at least 2 ways. I work as a leader, and we're all leaders in one way or the other in society, in my opinion. But I'm particularly interested in public policy, and I'm interested in questions about how systems should be structured to engage the public in conversation. What's the appropriate role of the public in making public policy decisions? And how do we make decisions that affect the public? So I think professionally, I'm interested in that. Academically, I'm interested in that. But I'm also interested as a member of society and as a member of the Jamaat. I'm interested because I need to know, as a parent, what's our collective children's role in society? How do we want to coach them to be in society? What's the purpose of their education? And how do we as a Jamaat want to participate in the broader diverse society that we're in? So this is why this matters to me, and I'm hoping some of it will resonate with your experience as well. As Nayab said, I am an ethicist. That's professionally what I do, what my professional and academic background is in. And so I'm very interested in everything that I do to try to intentionally build ethics capacity. And I think Hazram talks about this in a very useful way. And so let's hear how he describes it. The language is here. And then I'll talk about how we're going to try to do that in this session a little bit.
It seems to me to be the responsibility of educators everywhere to help develop ethically literate people who can reason morally whenever they analyze and resolve problems, who see the world through the lens of ethics, who can articulate their moral reasoning clearly, and even in a world of cultural and religious diversity, and have the courage to make tough choices.
So notice that Maulana Hazram does not talk about ethics as being a nice guy. It's about a skill set here. It's actually about the ability to reason morally, to articulate our thinking to people who are different than us, and then to act, to have courage and act. And so I'm just going to go through the conversation as we participate in this conversation together, and I talk for quite a while, and then hopefully we have some conversation. I invite you to ask yourself these questions. What is it that I'm saying is important? I've already made some assertions about things that are important, and I'm going to say more about that. What am I saying is important? And what's my argument? And what do you think of that argument? Do you accept the argument? Do you disagree? And why or why not? I'm going to tell you a bit about what I think the world is looking like. What do you think of my argument? What's my evidence? The evidence that I'm basing my assertions on. Again, do you see the evidence in the same way? Do you agree with what I'm saying? Or why or why not? And wherever you land at the end of this conversation, what's the practical impact of it for you? What are you going to do as a result of this conversation, if anything? So I invite you to think about this as a way of building your muscle in moral reasoning as we go through the conversation. I don't know if I'm going to talk about these very much through the conversation, but I want to set these up just in case I do. I want to tell you three stories. They're based on real characters, but I will tweak them with some license I'll take with them as we go. One story is about Rhea, a medical student, who creates a program for students to visit lonely seniors living in long-term care facilities. Another story concerns Karim, a realtor who starts a Model UN program for students in his community. And then the third is Aziz, a retired bookkeeper who sits on his homeowners association for the townhouse complex where he lives. And I'm going to be asking as we go, what does it mean for these folks to be citizens? How is that happening for them? And let's see where this takes us. Okay, so I'm going to get into some of the content now. I want to start with the claim that all human beings are looking for a good life. That's what all of us are trying to do. We might disagree with each other's way of doing it or what we're trying to pursue, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to find a good life. And that good life includes at least two really important things. One, it requires a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of attachment. We get meaning from our relationships with other people. Adrienne Clarkson, the former Governor General for Canada, puts it this way. She said, it's society that makes it possible for us to develop ourselves as human beings. Personal relationships enrich us, work makes us feel useful, and goals give us purpose. It's in these webs of relationships that we find meaning in our lives. So we're all looking for belonging in this way. But another thing that's really important is the idea of opportunity, because it's not just that we're looking for a good life where we are, we're always seeking a better life. We have this desire to improve the lives of our families, our future generations. That's something we're always looking for. And as a result of that, movement is often very much a part of the story of many people in looking for a good life. And I know that's certainly true in my life, and I imagine it's true in yours as well. In my life, it looked like my grandparents and great-grandparents beginning in Gujarat, India, and then moving to Kampala, Uganda, in East Africa. And they crossed the sea to do that. And it wasn't easy travel, and they left everything behind. They went to Kampala, Uganda. And then my parents and my grandparents picked us up and moved again across the sea and across the continent to find another place where we might have a better life. And we landed in Vancouver. And then even when we were in Vancouver, we moved from Vancouver to Eastern Canada to search for a good life, and then came back to Vancouver to pursue that search again. And each time we had to let go of much of what we had and started again. So we're constantly moving, many of us, to find what that good life looks like. And what that does is it situates us with people who are all of a sudden different, because there's mixing that happens as a result of this. And the Ojibwe Grand Chief John Kelly observes this about where we land. He says, it also appears that as the years go by, the circle of the Ojibwe gets bigger and bigger. Canadians of all colors and religions are entering that circle. You might feel that you have roots somewhere else, but in reality, you're right here with us. I do not know if you feel the throbbing of the land in your chest, and if you feel the bear is your brother with a spirit purer and stronger than yours, or if the elk is on a higher level of life than is man. You might not share the same spiritual anguish I see when the earth is ravaged by a stranger. but you can no longer escape my fate as the soil turns barren and the rivers poison. Much against my will, and probably yours, time and circumstance have put us together in the same circle. The reality is that we find ourselves, for better or worse, by intention or otherwise, alongside people who are different than us. And so the question of politics, in a sense, is okay, so we're in this space where we're living with people who are different than us, living nearby people who are different than us. How do we want to organize ourselves such that we can best achieve that goal we're trying to pursue, the good life? How do we organize ourselves? What are the terms of the political association that we will have or try to achieve, use to achieve that end? Now, one of the things that's important to observe in the way I'm framing this is that notice that the nature of that political association is a means to an end. It's a way of getting what we really want, which is to say that understanding of what a good life, a happy life, a meaningful life actually is. And so if the means we're using don't work, we need to change them. And so Hazram has pointed a couple of times to this idea that this report where there are people who have considered authoritarian options for political association more superior to democratic ones when they actually achieve, or they would prefer that if they're going to lead to the outcome of a good life being realized more effectively. So it's a means to an end, the idea of the nature of the political association that we choose. I think the other thing to note is that we're always working this out, and we have been working this out forever. So before the Americas were colonized, there was still discussion amongst the First Nations people here about how we should organize politically. Then you had people come from Western Europe to the Americas, and all of a sudden that conversation changed, but it continued. And it has been going on for a long time. So we're always trying to make decisions about how to organize ourselves in the context of history, in a stream of history, reacting to what's happened in the past. And I'll just point to a couple of things here. So last week, Chile voted, the people of Chile voted that to revisit their constitution. They were going to revisit the terms of association they would have, the rights and privileges they would have, the responsibilities they would accept for how they will structure their society so that they may improve the quality of life of the people in that country. In your own country, in the United States, just last week, you confirmed a new justice to the Supreme Court of the United States. And then one of the presidential candidates has said, we're going to, if we get elected, really study the situation to see is the way that the Supreme Court's structured, is that actually going to best serve our needs? Is that the best way to look at the interpretation and enforcement of some of the most important laws in our land? All I'm observing here is that this is evolution. There's change happening. We're constantly revisiting the terms of our association. Don't need to worry too much about the detail on this slide, but as I was preparing for this talk, I just checked in to see where were elections happening. And I was kind of surprised, right, to be honest. Just in the 2 months, October and November of 2020, so just these last 2 months, this month and next month, 35 countries in the world are somehow participating in elections or in some kind of plebiscite to revisit some key legislation in their country, including the constitutions in some places. So it's happening all around the world, in a sense, all the time. Okay. So what then is democratic citizenship? Well, based on the story I've told, it's basically a belonging an individual has to a political state. There's a geographic boundary that where this group of people is trying to determine the terms of its political association, and a citizen is a member of that group. And in a democratic context, it's about agency. So citizen is identified with the term agent, meaning that you actually have choice, that you agree and are willing to engage in conversations and exercises or processes to make decisions about the governing, the way that the society is going to be governed. You have the ability to consent or withhold consent from from some of these decisions. So you can contrast this from in an authoritarian context where you don't have citizens, you have subjects. They don't actually participate in the process of making decisions about how society will be governed. They're simply told in those contexts how society will be governed. Well, when you have a citizen, it implies agency, it implies choice. And again, it comes with then the legal entitlement of rights and benefits, and then some duties and responsibilities, and we'll talk about both of those in a minute. One of the interesting things about this idea then of citizenship is it automatically forces us into this challenging balancing act. Because now, as a citizen of a community, as a state, I belong to this entity. But I still have my commitments to my family, I have my commitments to myself and to the groups with which I'm familiar, my intimate groups to which I belong. And now I have to kind of figure out, how do I balance my commitments to my family, to my smaller community, and then to the larger community? And that's one of the interesting challenges that democracy poses for us. One of the things that's useful to observe, to notice, is that for a society to function, it requires its citizens to actually behave in certain kinds of ways at a very basic level. If a society is going to have systems and structures for things like healthcare, for care for the vulnerable, to look after the environment, to regulate the economy, to pursue fairness and justice, it requires the citizens to actually follow and to make decisions that will enable the government to do this. The government can't do everything on its own. Healthcare, yes, we can build a healthcare system, but you still need citizens to look after their own health. You still need citizens to make good choices about their own health. Yes, we can build a system to look after those who are the most vulnerable in society, but citizens still need to take responsibility for caring for the people in their lives. There's no way that that responsibility could be totally taken on by the state. So citizenship so far requires agency, willingness to participate in a process of governance to some extent, and then it also requires following some of the basic processes that are required for the state to actually function. Okay. So what is democracy really all about? You might think of democracy as about, you can think about democracy in a way as about self-determination. The idea is this, that if a decision concerns me and my ability to achieve a good life, well, I know best what a good life looks like for me, so I should have some say in that decision. That's kind of a principle of self-determination that in a way is at the base of the idea of democracy. And so democracy is trying to balance these two very important values. It's these two commitments. On the one hand, there's the value of freedom, the idea that I should be free to choose the kind of life I want and to make choices in my life that allow me to live as well as I can from my perspective, bounded by a set of rules. But what's interesting is that I get to have a say in what those rules actually are. That's the freedom component of it. The other component of it is the equality component of it. The idea that this isn't just about me, and that actually every human being is worthy, has dignity, is worthy of respect, and is worthy of having their perspective of what a good life looks like respected and honored, and therefore they also get to participate in this process of determining the rules of engagement, the way that we're going to govern ourselves. So it's balancing these two very important values. Again, notice that this is a promise, that if we do things this way, it'll get us the good of achieving our quality of life as we understand it, a good life as we understand it. But now there are different ways of interpreting democracy, and there's lots of different ways of organizing ourselves, even within the confines of these two values. And so we have to constantly be checking to say, well, are we actually able to do this? And if the ways we're doing things now aren't working, then we might need to change things. So let me just quickly use Rhea's story to try to elaborate this. And so imagine Rhea, again, medical student who started a program for visiting seniors in long-term care facilities. So Rhea builds a very close relationship with one of these seniors. And what's happened is that the country has recently actually legalized medical assistance in dying. So it's now legal for someone to have a doctor in certain circumstances take their life if they judge it not to be of a sufficient quality. And again, there are very important parameters that need to be met in order for that to happen. But this woman now, this one of the woman with whom Rhea has built a relationship, and it was very a lonely woman, doesn't have anyone else around in her world, looks at Rhea and says, "Can you help me with this? Not only can you enable it for me, but can you journey with me while I get this procedure done?" So this is very interesting because Rhea now has a very difficult challenge she has to face. She has to figure out, well, what do I think about medical assistance in dying? It also assumes, from a democratic perspective, that she had some say in in creating that law. And that's an interesting question. Did she? How free is she in society? And so one of the challenges I want to pose that democracy faces is this question of, are we really setting the rules? Um, if you think about medical assistance in dying, you think about so many decisions that we have to make around COVID, about resource allocation, about the opening of schools, about the opening of businesses. How much influence do we actually have in making those choices? And when it comes to healthcare in Canada, anywhere where I live, the choice that citizens have is as follows. We have a provincial election. We appoint, we elect a government. The government identifies a minister of health. The minister of health works with unelected civil servants. Together, they appoint a chief executive officer for an organization, a health region that looks after the global health needs of the community served by that group. That health CEO hires an executive team. That executive team works with a bunch of leaders to make rules and implement those rules. So those rules that I'm impacted by, how did I really get a say in them? And that's a really interesting challenge, is what is the role of the citizen in actually informing discussions, decisions about that we're making? And it's a live question. So I'm not trying to give you a tight answer to this. I'm just naming this as an internal tension. Another really important internal tension concerns this idea of the goal of democracy. And by that, what I mean is, when we're setting these rules, is it the case that we are trying to get everyone to register what their vote is on a particular issue or question? And then we're trying to add up those votes and say which number of votes is going to best meet the needs of the people, medical assistance in dying. Are we trying to find out what everyone individually thinks about medical assistance in dying and then see where the majority is taking us, and then that's how we're going to make decisions? Or is the purpose of governance, democratic governance, actually to create a space where we figure out together what the right answer is? What are the values that we should actually be trying to live up to in the laws that we create related to medical assistance in dying? This is a very different kind of conversation where people are coming together to deliberate, think through what's important to me, what's my understanding of death and dying, what's my understanding of the purpose of medicine, what's my understanding of the purpose of life, and how do we actually work together? What should our common approach be? And I want to just quickly name this quote reminds us of the Aristotelian perspective, which is that that actually, if it's the case that a political arrangement simply becomes a way of adjudicating rights between people, then it's not a real polis. It's not a real. It's not a real political arrangement. It's simply a rule-based arrangement in a sense, and that politics really is about a place for people to come together and figure out together, what does a good life look like? What does justice lived actually look like?
The spiritual root.
Oops. And I think that Hazaram actually has a view. My interpretation of this is aligned in this way. When we talk about a cosmopolitan ethic, it's very much about this idea of building a shared approach to this. So let's see what this is from the Tutsing Evangelical Academy, where Maulana Hazaram spoke in 2006. So think about how he frames this.
The spiritual roots of tolerance include, it seems to me, a respect for individual conscience, seen as a gift of God, as well as a posture of religious humility before the divine. It is by accepting our human limits that we can come to see the other as a fellow seeker of truth and to find common ground in our common quest. Let me emphasize.
So notice here, and then he follows it up by saying, what's needed all across the world is a new cosmopolitan ethic, rooted in a strong culture of tolerance. The words I want to focus on here are common ground for common quest. We find ourselves in the same circle now as a whole bunch of people. We're on a common quest. We're all trying to find the best life that we can have. And, and politics is about coming together to find common ground in that common quest, which means being a certain way with each other. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, I also want to tie in here the idea of integrity. For me, the way I think about integrity is the alignment of what we think a meaningful life looks like with it coming about. So it's about the alignment with our talk, with our walk, action and deed. Those and thought. Those are the things that are actually coming together. It's about, in a sense, authenticity in a certain way. And so the question is, if you think that having a sense of a meaningful life and then living that meaningful life is what integrity looks like, then how do we actually arrive at an understanding of what a meaningful life looks like? How did you land on your understanding of what you think a good life looks like that you're trying to pursue every day? Did you just do that privately in your home, or did you do it in other places? If you think about Rhea, notice what's going on. She put herself in a situation where she is in the community serving. And all of a sudden, she came face to face with a very difficult question, this policy of medical assistance in dying. Now she is forced to encounter that and shape her own understanding of a meaningful life against this reality of the world. Karim might have the situation where he, in the Model UN program, has the opportunity to send a handful of his students on an international trip, and he has to decide, who do I send? Do I send those who are the best qualified, who can have the greatest chance of using this as a trampoline to really achieve high heights in their academic careers? Do I save this opportunity for those who don't have any other opportunities in school or other places to have access to these kinds of experiences, or something else altogether? Karim, in the space of participating in service in the community, is encountering, again, a question about what really life is all about, what matters. So what I'm saying is that by participating in political life, we actually get exposed to important questions that help shape our understanding of who we are. It's by doing this that we actually arrive at a sense of integrity, or at least gives us a greater chance of arriving at integrity. Okay, so I'll leave that for now. I'm going to push on. Now, I've said then, citizenship is about agency. It's about willing to participate in public life, in processes of governance. It's about following to some extent, the rules of society so that the rules can actually function. And it's about understanding who we are and working with others to develop a common understanding that should guide our common path forward. It's not easy to be a citizen. And there are many global challenges that we face that make this a very difficult task, and state governance a very difficult task. And these next two slides point to some of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to point to a couple. One of them is the top left corner here, which speaks again to that migration question. 272 million people moved across national borders in search of a better life in 2020. That's almost twice what that was in 2000, and that's only going to grow for various reasons. The number of people moving now is vast, so the extent of the diversity is significant and pushing us in ways that we might not be comfortable with entirely. The top right corner talks about greater inequality. Inequality is a problem in society. Extreme inequality is a problem, because if it's the case that your inequality becomes so great, then what happens is that those who are the most affluent in society will start to have their needs met in private ways. I'm going to go to private school. I'm going to drive around in my cars and not use public transport. I'm going to rely on private security and not the police. I'm going to use private healthcare facilities and not other public facilities. And what happens is two things. One, there is less of a commitment to those public goods, which are necessary for the whole community. And so those get eroded and undermined. But two, and perhaps more importantly, all of a sudden, the spaces that we occupy as people become separated. We become ghettoized in a way. Our public parks are not places where people of different walks of life come together. Our libraries are not places where people from different walks of life come together. We don't encounter each other so we can learn about each other in these healthy kinds of ways when we have such significant inequality. You can see there's growing tolerance, fear of the other, and I'll just here point to the top left corner that the borders that we have are porous. They're not respected by things like viruses. They're not respected by things like environmental degradation. They're not respected by things like even changes to the economy. So what happens in one country has an impact on other countries, and we now, living in this country, have to figure out how are we going to deal with this. So there's lots of challenges that make being citizens hard and governance in these contexts very, very hard. Okay, so where does this take us? We've said that politics is about trying to figure out how we organize ourselves to try to achieve a good life. We're all trying to achieve a good life, no matter what our background is, no matter what our belief system is. We're all trying to achieve a good life. We have to figure out how to organize ourselves. Democracy is a way of allowing us to have our views about that reflected in the choices that are made about the governance of our lives. And that there are some challenges that come with being citizens. In order to live up to these challenges, citizens need to show up in a certain kind of way in order to take on these challenges. And that's what I want to talk about for this next little bit of time, is what are the characteristics, the character traits, the virtues that citizens need to understand, interpret, and demonstrate in their lives in order for us to be able to tackle these challenges and to really have the best chance at achieving that quality of life that we are all seeking. And I'm relying just here on two scholars, a liberal and a communitarian, Michael Sandel and Will Kimmelka, who talk about these five, I'll call them virtues. They call them virtues. One of them calls them virtues. The idea of public spiritedness, a sense of justice, civility and inclusiveness, a shared sense of solidarity, and service. Now, these are drawn from Western literature, philosophical literature on democracy and citizenship. But I'm actually going to use quotes from Maulana Hazrat Imam to actually help illustrate some of these. And that's, I'm not so subtly saying there's an interesting harmony in the way that we're thinking about this. So let's start with public spiritedness. Public spiritedness is, I think, spoken about in a couple of ways by Maulana Hazrat Imam. The first is this idea of a commitment to a democratic ethic. In 2015, at the New York Times, the International New York Times Democracy Forum, Hazrat described it this way. He said, at the heart of a democratic ethic is a commitment to genuine dialogue to achieve a better quality of life, even across new barriers of distance and diversity. This means a readiness to give and take, to listen, to bridge the empathy gaps as well as the ignorance gaps that have so often impeded human progress. One ultimate requirement for any effective democracy is the capacity to compromise. Social order rests in the end either on oppression or accommodation, but we can never find that balancing point where the interests of all parties are recognized unless competing leaders and their diverse followers alike are committed to finding common ground. The commitment to a democratic ethic, public spiritedness, is about going into conversations with people open to hearing, to listening, to sharing, to deliberating together, to find that common ground in our common quest. And this requires a pluralist disposition. This requires a way of looking at difference that says, yes, it's a challenging blessing, but it's a blessing. Difference is actually a really good thing. And I have to treat people with respect in this engagement that I have with them. I need to listen to them. I need to share my perspective, and then we need to collaborate effectively. And what's important in knowing this is that the idea of pluralism and a cosmopolitan ethic is not that we need to give up our core commitments. I don't need to give up, as an Ismaili Muslim, my core commitments as I work in a public setting that lives up to the spirit of this value as we deliberate on how to move forward. What I do need to do is be open and come to find some kind of common ground where we can move forward together. And this is actually where I got the title for this talk, where Hazrat said, on accepting the Global Pluralism Prize in 2016, that one's identity need not be diluted in a pluralistic world, but rather fulfilled as one bright thread in a cloth of many colors. We are trying to understand and live our lives fully in participation with other people, such that our own threads are brighter and the cloth is brighter as well. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, so that's public spiritedness. The second virtue that we need to focus on is this idea of justice. And I've described it here as justice forward and back. And again, I'm going to go to Adrienne Clarkson. I really like what she said here. She said, citizenship is not a buffet where you can take the shrimps and leave the roast beef. Citizenship is a fixed menu, and we all dine from it. The acceptance of the whole meal is our obligation. What does she mean by this? I think what she means is that when we are members of a community, a polity, doesn't matter how new we are to that group, we're part of that group. We own all of the group, warts and all, the good stuff and the bad stuff. We are responsible for it all. We are responsible for it going forward, and we're responsible for what happened in the past as well. And we have to have a sense of justice as we look at the world that we own, that we are part of, that we take ownership of. So what's justice forward? This is my framing. Justice forward is the idea that, again, the basic principles, the premises of democracy is that everyone ought to have, and it's an interesting question what everyone looks like, but I'm not going to go there right now. Everyone ought to have the ability to participate in the governance decision making, whatever that looks like, under certain circumstances. So justice means identifying, well, it means here, actually, I'll just read the quote by Will Pimicla. He says, justice means eliminating any economic or social barriers to the participation of disadvantaged groups. And if there are serious injustices in our society, which can only be rectified by political action, then citizens should recognize an obligation to protest against that injustice. So he's arguing that as citizens, we have to protect the principles of the democracy, which are that everyone ought to be treated equally in terms of the way they're treated under the law and their ability to participate in the democracy. And where we see that that's not happening, our job is to try to change those institutions to help make sure that those institutions become more just. Obviously, quickly, what comes to my mind is policing in the United States, for better or worse, where you have systems of policing that seem to treat some people, subgroups in the population differently for reasons that don't seem morally relevant. The color of my skin is not a good reason to make assumptions about my more likelihood to be dangerous, to behave in certain ways, things like that. And so it's unjust in that context, if that's going on, where that's going on, for that institution of policing to actually behave in this way, to discriminate in this way against the population, and that the citizenry has an obligation to actually do something about it. We need to act in certain kinds of ways that live up to our values as we respond, but we have an obligation to do something about that. Justice backward is about looking at the historical context to say that as the experiments of diversity in the Western world, anyway, in the New World have unfurled, what have the consequence been? Because there's been lots of injustice along the way. And it's about saying, I need to go back and remedy the injustices of the past to make sure that I'm in a situation where the people who are not only are they not being discriminated against right now, but there's a genuine ability to participate. They feel respected. They're in the community. Adrienne Clarkson in Canadian experience says we will not be able to continue to negotiate difference in our country until we have honestly fulfilled our promise to our Aboriginal people. And again, there are populations in the United States. You can obviously think of the Aboriginal communities in the United States and the African American population in the United States, for whom this is, I think, a fundamental question that needs to be tackled. I'll leave it there. Another virtue is the idea of civility and inclusiveness. So civility is simply about treating people in a sense kindly, gently, and well, including them in the conversation, treating them with respect. So we cannot, actually, again, I'll just read the quote. It's late, it's easier for me to read the quote. So Adrian says, we cannot create a civil society by including only the people we like and with whom we share similar interests and goals. That's called friendship. And a society, a country is more than friendship. Our true strength will come in building a good society, not only with those whom we like, admire, and share values with, but also with those whom we do not like and whose values and inherent beliefs are different than our own. Again, we're all in this for better or worse, whether we like it or not. And civility and inclusiveness is about working with people across those boundaries. The next to our solidarity and service, so solidarity is really, again, about the way we look at the whole and our commitment to the whole. And here again, the link is to equality that I'm pointing. It's saying that the virtue of solidarity is saying that I will not let my group become so separated from the group, from the larger population, from the larger community with whom I belong, to whom I belong, with whom I have a shared sense of belonging to the state. And so I will do what I need to make sure that we are actually together. I will keep that public spirit in mind. So that means dealing with that kind of not tolerating that level of income inequality that would lead to separation of that of the society. Okay, I'm going to keep going on this. The next one I want to talk about is service. And this is a very important part of the idea of a cosmopolitan ethic and a strengthening, in a sense, of this idea of citizenship. Let's see how Hazrimam talks about this idea of service.
One key to Canada's success in building a meritocratic civil society is your recognition that democratic societies require more than democratic governments. I've been impressed by recent studies showing the activity of voluntary institutions and not-for-profit organizations in Canada to be among the highest in the world. This Canadian spirit resonates with a cherished principle in Shia Ismaili culture, the importance of contributing to one's individual energies on a voluntary basis to improving the lives of others. This is not a matter of philanthropy, but rather self-fulfillment, enlightened self-fulfillment.
So service is, in a sense, also tied to solidarity. The idea is that by serving my community in the civil space, by serving all three of our participants in the stories, Rhea, Karim, and Aziz, are all participating in civil society. They're offering their time to make their worlds better in those different ways. And by doing that, they're actually strengthening the social bonds, making it easier to understand each other, creating spaces where we can actually argue about hard questions, and then increasing the likelihood that we can actually find that common ground on our common quest. So service is really a very important dimension then of citizenship. Okay, so the question then, so what I'm saying is that citizenship matters because it's going to impact our ability to achieve our end, which is achieving that good quality of life that we're looking for, as we understand it, in a way that's respectful to the way other people understand it. And it requires living up to certain virtues, accepting, interpreting, acting on certain ways of being. Public spiritedness, being willing and open to collaborate with others, having a sense of justice, treating others with civility and tolerance, demonstrating solidarity with others, and then serving others. Question is, how do you learn this? Where do you get this? It's a really important question, and I'm going to give you two answers. It's commonly understood that actually the purpose of education is to create citizens. That actually one of the reasons we want to have education systems is not just so people can go out and get good jobs. It's actually so people can understand what that citizenry looks like, to encounter people who are in that citizenry, and to begin practicing the skills they need to actually be successful as citizens who are working together to make the best life possible for all of us together. School is a really important place for citizenship education. It's not always turning out that way, and so one of the ways that, again, I'm going to refer to a speech excerpt from Alhaji Imam in Portugal in 2006. He said, "For too long, some of our schools have taught too many subjects as subsets of dogmatic commitments. Too often, education made our students less flexible, confident to the point of arrogance that they now had all the answers, rather than more flexible, humble in their lifelong openness to new questions and new responses. An important goal of quality education is to equip each generation to participate effectively in what has been called the great conversation of our times." Now, there's an interesting things going on here, because we're saying that schools should teach our children these things. Not all of them are doing that, but part of the whole idea of a democracy is that you can actually try to influence that. So how do you actually think about what's being taught in schools? How do you think about how it's being taught in schools? How do you think about the culture that exists in schools? These are all things that citizens have an opportunity to try to influence through various public spheres. And that's a very important dimension of citizenship. The other place that we learn about how to live these values is through participation in civil society. And again, I'm going to use the examples of Karim and Rhea and Aziz. So imagine that Aziz is on the Homeowners Association and they have to make a decision. Do I give the contract for garbage to this company who is the cheapest, but they're going to put everything in the landfill? Or do I choose a company that's actually going to recycle the appropriate stuff for recycling? But the thing is, it's going to be more expensive. So there are spheres now. Rhea at the long-term care facility, Karim in his United Nations leadership team, and Aziz at the Homeowners Association. These are spheres where they can actually, by participating in the arguments about what they should do, how they should answer the challenges that they're facing, actually figure out how to work together. The civil society is a place where we can experiment, we can learn, we can figure out together what should matter and how we should do that as we go through the journey of life together. So civil society itself is a way that we learn what it means to be good citizens. So another reason for participating in civil society. Now, in order to be good citizens in this way, we need access to resources. Citizenship requires access to basic rights, and some of the argument in politics and in people who are academic world thinking about politics are about what is the right set of rights that is appropriate in order to actually meet the needs of the citizenry to be good citizens. I'm not going to go into this at this stage. I just want to point these to you for now, recognizing the fact that these are important resources that are required to live up to our responsibility as citizens. What I do want to switch to is the last phase of the conversation, and I want to talk about the Shia Ismaili Tariqa, and I want to talk about the rooting it provides followers of this tradition for participating in citizenship. And what I want to say is that there's a great alignment, actually, when you think about it, that being a part of this tradition, this tradition is deeply rooted, and that rooting not only aligns with the importance of creating political relationships that allow all to achieve a good life, but they strengthen the followers' ability to be good citizens. There are wonderful, rich resources here that we can draw on, and that's what I'm going to focus on for the next 7 or 8 slides, I think. So I'm going to talk about the different ways that I think the tradition is rooted, one way of talking about it that I think aligns with citizenship. So the first thing that I want to point to is the rooting in humanity. So I'm going to read this passage from, again, the Parliament address that Hazram provided the Parliament of Canada. He said, "Let me end with a personal thought. As you build your lives for yourselves and others, you will come to rest upon certain principles. Central to my life has been a verse in the Holy Quran, which addresses itself to the whole of humanity. It says, 'O mankind, fear your Lord, who created you of a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them scattered abroad many men and women.' I know of no more beautiful expression about the unity of our human race, born indeed from a single soul. In this tradition, we see that followers of the tradition are connected deeply to humanity. As a Jamaat, we're a global Jamaat. There's a sisterhood and brotherhood of Ismaili Muslims around the world. It's the well being of the entire global Jamaati family that matters as we are negotiating our lives everywhere we are. We're connected to the Muslim Ummah, the broader community of Muslims around the world. And we have deep commitments to the broader human family. So when, as citizens, we are trying to struggle with difference, we can take solace in the fact that the person that's different than us is actually a reflection of who we are, that we're deeply committed. We're in this together at a very deep level. Okay, so there's rooted into humanity. There's rooting in place. Which of these countries do you think that humanity lives in? Where is humanity located? So in a way, that's a silly question because these lines that you see on this map, well, they're not real. We kind of made them up and we've agreed to pretend that they're real, but they're actually not real. They're in a sense arbitrary. Some of them are really arbitrary, depending on how wars were resolved, but I don't need to go there. This is really what the world looks like. And it's this place that we're connected to, this entire globe. I'll just read the poem from Sadi. I am joyous in the world of nature, for the world of nature is joyous through him. I am in love with the whole cosmos, for the whole cosmos comes from him. We are connected to God. We are connected to the world, to God's creation in this tradition. So we're deeply rooted to place, not according to these arbitrary lines, but to the larger, the place of the world. We're rooted in time. Now, I'll unpack this for a moment. This picture is meant to speak to this phrase here at the bottom, the absolutization of the transient. This is a phrase from Sayyid Hussein Nasr, and he warns, he said, sometimes we get so caught up in the moment. I'm so worried about the world in this moment and the way it is, and I think this is all that there is. And I forget that the world did not always look like this, and it's not always going to look like this. Then in fact, we are part of streams of history. We're connected to time in much, much larger and complicated ways than what we're experiencing in the given moment. In this tradition, we're connected in time to a tradition that's 1,500 years old. I'll just read the excerpt. Hazaram spoke to the parliament in Portugal, and he said, the Ismaili Imamate itself, as you may know, is an international institution that goes back some 15 centuries to the time of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him and his family. This means that when I inherited my role just 61 years ago, I became the 49th hereditary Imam of the Ismaili Muslims. Through the centuries, the seat of the Ismaili Imamate has been formally designated in one or more locations by the Imam of the time, depending on the requirements of the day. It has known many homes over the years throughout the Arabian Peninsula, in the Middle East, in South Africa, and in North Africa. It moved to Cairo in the 10th century when my ancestors founded that city. The tradition that we belong to is a centuries-old tradition. The values that come from this tradition are time-tested values. And we can take solace and comfort in the fact that what this tradition is teaching is something that has been around for a very long time. There's actually many streams of thought of time that we're connected to. We're connected to streams of the political environments we live in. As I said, the experience of Canada and the US are 400 years old or something like that. And the political dynamics have started more recently from then, and they will continue. But we're part of that stream. We're connected to 1400 years of Muslim history and Ismaili history. We're connected to 2700 years, the history of the Abrahamic tradition. And then there's an altogether different sense of time that we're connected to. A speech that, and I'm grateful to Bashir Jiwani for reminding me of it, said, where Hazram said at Peshawar in 1967, the day we no longer know how, nor have the time, nor the faith to bow in prayer to Allah, because the human soul that He has told us is eternal, is no longer of sufficient importance to us to be worthy of an hour of our daily working, profit-seeking time, will be a sunless day of despair. There's so much in this, but I just want to point out that the soul is eternal. The existence we have is eternal. The moment we're experiencing is just that, a moment. So we're rooted in time. We're rooted in faith, that the Muslim tradition does not make a distinction between faith and world. That when we act, we're always acting in both dimensions. There is no, it's fused. There is no separation between the two. Faith does not remove Muslims or their imams from daily practical matters in family life, in business, and community affairs. Faith, rather, is a force that should deepen our concern for our worldly habitat, for embracing its challenges, and for improving the quality of human life. And so this sense is also rooted in responsibility, that in this tradition, in the Muslim framework, we are the humanity of Allah. We are the servants of God, and we are responsible for looking after Allah's creation. I think another really important rooting that we should pay attention to is what quality of life actually means. I started out by saying that everybody is interested in pursuing a good life, and that includes a sense of belonging, and it includes opportunity. And there may be a couple of other things that are universal. But if you look at an understanding of quality of life within this tradition, there is actually a shape that this takes. If you look at the work of the AKDN, if you look at the work of the Jamaati institutions, you will see what shape, what quality of life actually looks like in this tradition. And it includes, first and foremost, spiritual well-being. That it's not about happiness in the moment, comfort and pleasure in the second that we're after. There's a deeper sense of well-being, of happiness, that is part of what quality of life involves searching for. There's economic security, and making sure that we have the basic minimum that we have, that everyone has the basic minimum they need to pursue a life of dignity. There's physical health and mental health that's important. There's education for the right purposes so that we can better understand our world, understand our relationship to God, that we can better serve the world, our community, to actually achieve that good life that we're looking for. Quality of life includes this commitment to community, which we've been talking about. It includes a commitment to peace in our everyday lives, and it includes pluralist dispositions towards difference. And there are more, but I'm just pointing out that there is a shape of quality of life that is discernible that we are trying to secure. We're rooted in leadership, in the authority of leadership, in the role of the imam. I'm not going to read this. And we are rooted in intellect. And this is very important, that we clearly have a commitment in our tradition to the intellect, that the Ali tradition is an intellectual tradition. An intellectual tradition in at least two ways. Let me ask, we'll play an excerpt of Hazrat Imam's with respect to the reasoning dimension of it.
But again, progress is possible when complex issues are subjected to competent, intelligent, nuanced, and sophisticated analysis, free from dogmatism, and based upon what I would describe as empathetic knowledge.
So reason has a crucially important place to play in the way that we understand and try to react to, respond to the challenges that we face in our lives. And then our intellect is beyond reason as well. It's about trying to understand in a more broad way what our world is all about. And this happens in our relationship with the Imam. I'll leave the quote here. I'm not going to read it just in the interest of time. I'm going to push on. Oops.
But again, progress is...
Okay. The tradition is rooted in humility before the divine. So again, I'm going to read an excerpt of a speech that Hazrat made that's crucially important. A central element in a truly religious outlook, it seems to me, is the quality of personal humility, a recognition that strive as we might, we will still fall short of our ideals, that climb as we might, there will still be unexpected and mysterious peaks above us. It means recognizing our own creaturehood and thus our own human limitations. In that recognition, it seems to me, lies our best protection against false prophecies and divisive dogmatism. A deepening sense of spiritual commitment and the ethical framework that goes with it will be a central requirement if we are to find our way through the minefields and the quicksands of modern life. That part of our disposition in collaborating with others to solve the problems of the world is recognizing the limitations of our perspectives and really putting aside to some extent the strength of our convictions to really understand the other, so we might be able to learn where learning can be had and move forward together in a constructive, collaborative way. Okay, so my second last slide. So Hazram summarizes this way, and I'm going to just rely on him to do that. And again, this is, you can see him receiving the Adrian Clarkson Prize for Global Citizenship. So and then after this, I'll conclude with my last slide.
These are just a few thoughts as I look to the future of global citizenship. These are just a few thoughts as I look to the future of global citizenship. The challenges in some will be many and continuing. What will they require of us? A short list might include these strengths: a vital sense of balance, an abundant capacity for compromise, more than a little sense of patience, an appropriate degree of humility, a good measure of forgiveness, and of course, a genuine welcoming of human difference. It will mean hard work. It will never be completed, but no work will be more important. Thank you.
Okay, so back to the beginning we go. I said at the beginning that I'm going to make some claims. I'm claiming that citizenship involves accepting rights and responsibilities to help shape our world every day. That we're creating what it means to be a citizen and what democracy is, what the political associations we want are, all the time. It's an ongoing evolutionary process. That citizenship is crucial to this process, and that in order for us to be good citizens, we need to demonstrate certain virtues. We need to understand certain commitments and then demonstrate those commitments in our lives every day. And that the Shia Ismaili Muslim tradition can actually be interpreted as a call to citizenship, that this approach to citizenship, to working through the world to solve our collective issues, to pursue a good life together, are very much aligned with the key elements, the core commitments of Shia Ismaili value systems. So I ask you then, what do you think is important in all of this, and why? What is true about the world from your perspective, and what's your evidence for this? And what does this mean for how you will act as you go forward after today's session, assuming that you're still awake? Okay, so that's where we'll stop. Nayab, can I invite you back into the conversation, and how are we doing?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Jiwani, for this thoughtful presentation and for explaining how politics is about organizing ourselves and trying to achieve good lives for everyone. And democracy is a way for us to have our views heard and express the choices that we make and live up to the challenges so that we can better tackle them. And thank you for walking us through the virtues that we can apply and adopt in our lives to become better citizens. So let's go ahead and take a few questions from the audience, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
So in the beginning of the lecture, you talked about ethics as a set of skills that we can build muscle for. For instance, building muscle for moral reasoning, which is a very interesting idea. For me, when I think about this idea, a bigger moral question is about creating the willingness among citizens so that they think building such a skill set is essential in the first place. So the question is, where does this willingness come from? And is there something beyond treating ethics as a skill that may help answer the question? And let's say if it's the faith, like you alluded to, whose definition of ethics are we trying to build the skills for?
Thank you for that question. So in a sense, you're saying, well, how do we get a shared sense of what ethics is? And then how do we help people build those skills required to do that? I think that, like with almost any concept, there are multiple reasonable and legitimate ways of talking about these things. I think we need a place to start. And so we need to find just a common way of talking about it. So for me, that's why I focus on very pedestrian, ordinary language. So what I focus on is this idea of what's important. And so ethics is simply about trying to figure out in a situation what matters and what should matter most and why. And then how do we actually solve the problem? In my experience, I've been doing this, working in this, in the business of sort of teaching ethics for a long time now. And what I notice is that when I try to tell people that they should do this, it actually doesn't have much traction because they don't understand what I'm talking about. They know that it sounds right. I know that ethics is important, but how do I do it? What I've noticed is that what we need to do is actually just solve problems. So for example, let's take Karim's example of he's got to figure out, okay, who is going to get to go on this trip to this international? That's a real problem that he needs to solve. Well, however you define ethics, he needs to solve that problem. So I say, let's not worry about defining ethics. Let's solve the problem. And I'm saying the way Karim would do that is to sit with the people in his space and ask the question, what's important? And so all kinds of things are going to come out. It's important that we honor the effort of the people who have done the work as the participants. It's important that we maximize the opportunity for success in our students. It's important that we serve those who are the least vulnerable or the most vulnerable in the group of students. And there's so many other things that are going to be there. Then we ask the question, what's most important and why? And we drive in this conversation and we sit in this everyday kind of space and we solve the problem. And that's what you're doing when you're doing ethics. So the practical solution I have for you is in my presentation, I'm genuinely asking, what do you think is important when it comes to citizenship and why? That's exercising the ethics muscle. What do you think, Nayab? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Jiwani. Another question that we received from the audience is, if we see injustice, what do we do? Sometimes we may not have the power or even the privilege to act morally in such a situation. So how can the framework that you explained in the presentation help us to answer this question?
Absolutely. Such an important question. So let's be practical. I am at work and I see one of my colleagues who is whose English is a second language for them, and it feels like the rest of the team is actually somehow shunning them, or it looks like they're making fun of them, and they're kind of ostracizing them. It's a bit of an injustice that I see. What do I do with this? And I think that there are some important principles to keep in mind. So first of all, let's recognize that humility matters. So let's not pretend that we automatically know what's going on in the situation. Let's actually take a learning approach and say, what is going on? So I would want to go and ask my colleagues, hey, what's going on here? Why? I notice that this person is being ostracized. It looks that way to me. Is that really, what is your experience of what's going on? I would check in with that person to say, what's this experience like for you? I'm noticing something. Am I missing something? Or is this actually, are you experiencing this as being othered? Because, what's interesting about belonging is that I can't control belonging. In order for me to belong in a community with you, Nayab, you need to accept me. So I can ask this person, are you accepted into this community, or are you feeling like you're being alienated for reasons that really are irrelevant? After I understand what's going on, I would ask the question, well, what's important? I would ask my colleagues, I would say, it's really important for me that we treat each other with care, that we make the space for everyone to belong in our community. What do you think of that? And because notice that we have a common quest. We want a healthy work environment together. And we have to find common ground in that common quest. And we need to do that in a way that's humble, that's evidence-informed, that's critically thoughtful about what matters, and that allows everyone to flourish in the journey. So I would put these things on the table. And the background answer I want to give to that is that in order for us to actually pursue justice, a precursor in some ways is creating a kind of environment where it becomes safe to have these conversations. Because in order to have this kind of conversation, it requires vulnerability, right? Imagine how threatened you would be if I went to you and said, Nayab, how come you're treating these your colleague teachers less than inclusively? You're going to be defensive because you're being judged. It's not going to get us anywhere. So if we create a space up front that says, hey guys, in the way that we're working, we're committed to making sure that we're living up to certain values, and it's going to be okay for us to ask hard questions. And we're not doing it from the perspective of judgment, but we're doing this from the perspective of trying to make sure that our environment is living up to what really matters in the environment, then it becomes safer to have these kinds of conversations. So it's a journey of creating this kind of respectful environment where hard questions can be asked. It's not easy at all.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Jiwani. We'll take one more question. It's a clarification question, but I think it's an important one. This attendee asks, what does cosmopolitan ethic mean? And if you can explain it using an example like you have throughout the presentation.
Absolutely. I think that it can have multiple layers of meaning, and I want to just name that I'm giving you my interpretation of it. So others will have different ways of looking at this. In some ways, you can see cosmopolitan ethic as, to some extent, synonymous with common good, right? That we're trying to define what the common good looks like for us. It's a set of values that we can all buy into and that we can move forward on, right? That's kind of an understanding of a cosmopolitan ethic. So to give you an example, again, I'll just talk about Korean because we're there. We're trying to figure out, okay, well, what should matter when we're trying to figure out who should get access to the opportunity to go from the Model UN to this international opportunity. Well, there we're trying to find what is that common ground that we all agree on. And we have to argue our way to there. It won't just happen. But that, in some ways, in that very, very narrow example, is that cosmopolitan ethic. Writ much larger, it's about saying, okay, in terms of how we're going to deal with difference in our society, how are we going to deal with some of the challenging questions that we face? Medical assistance in dying, I named. Questions about how we're going to manage the Supreme Court in the United States. How are we going to deal with refugees and people who are coming new to our country? These are big, important, relevant questions we have to sort. The cosmopolitan ethic is in a sense, that outcome that we achieve through pluralist dialogue, where we are working together to figure out what are those common values that we can actually use to develop a solution from. So that's the way I would understand it. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jiwani. So I'm just going to be mindful of time, and we can go ahead and wrap it up over here. Thank you so much, Dr. Jiwani, for giving us your time today and sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. Your session, at least for myself, has left me with a lot of takeaways that'll definitely inform my actions in both my personal and professional life, especially with my role as an educator. And something that really resonated with me is how the purpose of education is to build a good citizen. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to share this conversation with you all. So, and best of luck with some very important activities that are going to be happening in the United States in the next little while. Be citizens, participate.
Thank you. A reminder for the audience, we've posted the evaluation link here in the chat box, and we'd like to encourage all of you to fill out the evaluation so that we can receive feedback. And join us for the next interactive critical conversation, which is going to take place this Sunday, November 1st, 2020. And it's exploring the topic of voting in faith, exploring justice and equity. It's going to take place at 1:00 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, 10 a.m. Pacific, and the registration link can be found in the chat box. We're looking forward to seeing all of you there. Have a good night, and Yali Madat, everyone.